Canada has consistently delivered unexpected race results, which is precisely what occurred this time. An old winner returns, a driver debuts on the podium, and a title contender complicates his life again. The Canadian Grand Prix has been an interesting race in many ways. We need to analyze these aspects in this short video. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the summary of the 2025 Canadian Grand Prix of Formula 1. Before we begin, as always, we have to go over the damage report from this race. This includes all the penalties we had today. Hadjar received a 3-place grid penalty for blocking Carlos Sainz in qualifying, dropping him out of the top 10. Ayuki, on his part, received a 10-place penalty for overtaking under a red flag during one of the practice sessions, sending him to the back of the grid. Basically, Pierre Gasly would start from the pit lane for braking Parc Fermé by making some adjustments, and would Liam Lawson start from Miami? At least because he was given a 50-place penalty for installing a new engine, going over the allowed limit. Joe Russell secured pole position with a surprising lap, narrowly beating Max Verstappen, who would start beside him on the front row. After what happened in Spain, it wasn't crazy to think that something could happen between these two in the race. And on Sunday, everything was set for a very interesting race. And once the cars lined up on the starting grid, the traffic lights would go out. And with that, the Canadian Grand Prix would begin. Russell's reaction at the start is excellent, and he prevents Verstappen from even being able to attack him. Piastri behind them tries to find space to overtake Verstappen, but boxed in, Antonelli takes advantage and overtakes him, sending him down to 4th position. Meanwhile, behind them, we had an interesting battle between Colapinto and Albon, where the Argentine driver overtook the tie, but when he tried to regain the position, he went off the track at turn 8 and, when rejoining, almost collided with Colapinto. But Hülkenberg takes advantage of this to pass both of them in a single move and move up to 9th position. Charles Leclerc and Lando Norris, who had terrible qualifying sessions, started this race on hard tires. They gradually progressed, passing Fernando Alonso's Aston Martin. Norris then pursued Lewis Hamilton, who unfortunately hit a marmot, damaging his car. And from that moment, his race was over because his pace was disastrous. He finished, but with a performance deficit. Meanwhile, Verstappen was losing pace against Russell and started to be pressured by Andrea. Red Bull brought Kimi Antonelli into the pits on lap 12, anticipating the stop. This forces Russell to pit a lap later, and Kimi, who had been pressuring Verstappen, to stop on lap 15. And when he comes out of the pits, he ends up a few seconds behind Max Verstappen. Piastri, on the other hand, pitted on lap 17 after staying out longer. Thanks to all this, Norris took the lead, Leclerc would finish second, and obviously they would pit much later since they started on hard tires. For his part, the lead was pretty stable and strategic, while in the back, the battles were intense. Drivers who gambled on an early one-stop strategy were moving up like Alonso, Hülkenberg or Colapinto and many others. But there were also drivers who were going for a one-stop strategy like Bortoleto or Carlos Sainz, which was creating several trains of drivers overtaking each other. Albon was one of those drivers who seemed to be trying to go for a one-stop strategy. But his first stint was on medium tires, so he started to drop off in pace, but unfortunately his engine ended up failing and he had to retire from the race shortly after. As the drag reduction system trains were in action, Hülkenberg began overtaking drivers to recover positions and reach the top spots. And Colapinto, who was in the top 10 before his first pit stop, got stuck behind Gabriel Bortoleto and couldn't overtake him. Finally, he changed his strategy from 2 pit stops to 1, and with that, he ended up losing a lot of performance, which ultimately took away his chance to fight for points. But while all this was happening, we also had Alonso overtaking drivers to quickly get back to the top, passing Tsunoda and Carlos Sainz. Little by little, he was working his way back to recover that position at the front. Leclerc came into the pits on lap 28 for a second stint on hard tires, while Norris would come in a lap later, but for a stint on medium tires, suggesting he would finish his last stint on hard tires. Russell maintained a strong pace, pulling away from Verstappen, who was again under heavy attack from Antonelli. So Verstappen is called into the pits again before the Italian driver could overtake him, and obviously once again anticipating the Mercedes driver's stop. The Germans respond by pitting Antonelli a lap later. Exiting the pit, the race was neck and neck. Antonelli briefly led Verstappen, but exiting the pit compromised his traction, and Verstappen regains the virtual second place in turn 2. Meanwhile, Piastri held on until lap 45 before stopping in the pits. And Russell stayed out on track for a few more laps, taking advantage of the time gap he had with the Dutchman. When Piastri returned to the track after his stop, he came out just 2 seconds behind Antonelli, so the fight for the podium was still very much alive. In fact, the top 4 drivers were relatively close, so anything could happen. And when Lando Norris made his last stop, he came out about 5 seconds behind Oscar Piastri with slightly fresher tires. And he started closing the gap lap by lap to the drivers ahead, where his pace seemed to be the fastest on the grid, giving us some very entertaining final laps, which showed Sauber's strategy working perfectly, as Hülkenberg regained 9th place to score points again. And did the strategy of Esteban Ocon and Carlos Sainz also work by going for just one stop? Because they started overtaking drivers and regaining the positions that would put them back in the points. As mentioned, following his pit stop, Norris gradually closed the gap to the drivers in front, putting him in contention for a podium finish. For the final 15 laps, Antonelli trailed Verstappen closely, but couldn't get within drag reduction system range. Meanwhile, Piastri was catching up to Antonelli, aided by the back markers and his pace. However, Lando Norris benefited the most, getting closer to his teammate on track and even within drag reduction system range. And it was finally time to see a worthy battle between these two. Norris was within drag reduction system range for a few laps but couldn't overtake, no matter how close he got. Piastri carefully managed his traction out of corners, making it nearly impossible for Norris to pass him at the end of the straights. At one point, Piastri got close to Antonelli to take his drag reduction system. It was uncertain if Piastri could pass the Italian, as Norris now seemed to face a challenging situation. On lap 66, Norris tries to overtake Piastri by braking late at the hairpin, but Piastri cleverly looks for traction on the exit. They come out side by side on the straight, and on this one, Norris starts to get his car a little ahead of the Australian, but he brakes late at the Wall of Champions chicane in an amazing way to defend his position. And after this, ladies and gentlemen, we officially witnessed the birth of Norris, the bus driver. Norris got better traction out of the Wall of Champions chicane with more exit speed, but he tried to force the inside line that Piastri had already covered. And who knows why he ends up hitting his teammate from behind. With that, the car hits the wall, breaks apart, and retires from the race, giving 12 more points of difference to his biggest rival for the title. With this, the safety car came out and the race was neutralized with only 3 laps to go. This meant that Jorge Russell returned to victory since Las Vegas last year, dominating the Canadian circuit. Jorge Russell secures his first win of the season for Mercedes with a strong performance following several challenging races, never giving anyone a chance to take the victory from him and closing out a brutal weekend for the Brit. The rest of the top 10 of the Canadian Grand Prix would finish as follows. Verstappen takes 2nd, recovering points. Antonelli claims 3rd, his first career podium. 4th position for Piastri, with the McLaren that was not dominant this time. Charles Leclerc finished 5th, while Hamilton's 6th place finish was impacted by his collision with the groundhog. 7th position and more points again for Fernando Alonso and Aston Martin. 8th place again, and surprisingly for Nico Hülkenberg, 9th place for Esteban Ocon. And closing the top 10, Carlos Sainz taking the last point for the Williams team. The race in Canada today was strategic, with few on-track battles but still interesting. Also, that ending added a bit of spice with the McLaren battle, although it ended up being pretty dull in the end because of the safety car. My rating for this Grand Prix will be 7.5. Entertaining race. The battle for the title changes completely, but there's still a lot of the season ahead, so there's still time for anything to happen. My drivers of the day are Russell, Verstappen and Nico Hülkenberg, with Russell's performance standing out. He didn't give anyone a chance. His pace was solid the whole time, and in the end he takes a perfectly earned victory. It's good for them and for Mercedes after so many complicated weekends. And my disappointment of the day can only be Lando Norris. He spent the whole weekend self-destructing. He had good pace, maybe the best on the whole grid, but things got complicated for him since qualifying. And then that silly accident he had with Piastri ended up completely ruining his race. He's now trailing his teammate by 22 points. It appears unlikely that he'll stop making errors and overtake the World Championship leader. There's still a season ahead, but Norris hasn't shown a hint of improvement since the start of the season, back in March in Australia. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the summary of the 2025 Canadian Grand Prix of Formula 1. But this is where I ask you, what did you think of the race? What's your rating for the Canadian Grand Prix? Also, share your drivers of the day and disappointments from this race. Let me know all your opinions in the comments section. With nothing more to add, I say goodbye by telling you that if you like this video, give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to this channel, enable notifications to know when I upload new videos, and share this with your friends. I also invite you to follow us on Instagram and Twitter. The links are in the video description. And I'll see you soon for more content here on your channel Skyline Racing. Thank you for tuning in and see you later. Thank you.